Perfect. I'd like to welcome up the first speaker from the affirming team to open their case.
Hi, am I audible? All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Whenever we see the situation as like these judges, as they have already contributed a lot in like creating those Hong Kong's law, and they have they have a deep connection in their laws as well. But as we can see, after how China, they have like their government, the way they are trying to overtake this kind of stuff. In this kind of situation, we believe like as a foreign judge on the CFA, we should resign. And exactly whenever we talk about this, we need to see from the perspective of the foreign judge. Like as from the foreign judge perspective, if we see everything and we like compare the whole situation, what's the best way to do in this kind of situation? If we see like historically, these judges have served and enjoyed their time in Hong Kong. But look, in this kind of situation, like should we stick with how we have been in there, or we should just resign? Because look, whenever there's a democratic process, there's always this kind of transfer of rights, like these people who actually need to have power, they should have the power. But look, it is true that this individual really care, but they will be seen as supporting the China if they didn't resign. Because look, so we can see from the history that China has always been a country that's always cracking down strikes. They have so much harsh punishment, so much they have so much loss that goes against humanity, and that's so much harsh. So what's going to happen, like if you don't just resign, people will see this kind of things like, okay, they may be the people that they are okay with it, they don't have any kind of problem with it, and they're sticking with China, and they might be a part of it. The next thing, whenever you are going to be see the things from the just perspective, obviously there are going to be two kind of forces, like one is the external forces, one's the internal forces. So what exactly the external forces looks like? Look, the judge who is even in, if he doesn't even resign and if he stays there, obviously because of China's this kind of rules, there will be people who are in jail because of this kind of harsh rules, because there are going to be people who are getting affected by this kind of rules. So this kind of people, obviously whenever he will see like there's a big amount of this kind of people who are getting affected by this rule, and just because of I am not doing anything about it, and I choose to be, even in this situation I chose to be here, like as like a soappiece that China has always tried to create, that this kind of people, they are suffering, and I am just being a part of this. And he is also going to have an internal pushback that look, even though if you will feel like a very like complicated, and obviously he or she is going to have the feeling like whatever this thing is going to happen, he is a part of this, and the guilt that the person is going to feel internally, the pushback, that is obviously going to have a big impact internally. So because you are now a part, as you are a part of this system, you who are you are also liable because of this thing, and you know, and you are just a part of this, and this guilt is going to consume them. The judges will have the limited autonomy under the China's laws, because that they are not, obviously China have obviously done this kind of stuff where they have tried to portray that no, we are not doing something very harsh, these things are okay and everything. Because but look, the China, they are very cruel, and all or what they always do, they always try to limit the autonomy, and they always try to dominate everything. Because China, we can say historically China is very cruel, and we can see this from the recent event, and like this is something that always happens. And look, China doesn't want any foreign or Western influence in their hegemony on in their region, because they always love to have the full power in their hand. So they obviously have the incentives that they don't want any kind of Western influence in their side. And the recent protests in Hong Kong, that always that's happening because of the China, because these people, the people of Hong Kong, they don't want the China's interference in them. They want this China's harsh laws over them, and they are protesting. But China is trying to like hardly dominate this all these people, and this is something that they like want to they want to cut off. But look, this kind of things is just going to be more bad day by day. Look, China in the past, from the past experience, we have always been like that. They are very much harsh, and they don't like have any kind of fairness. They just want all the things like how they want them to be. They want full power. They want no other anyone to have any control over, like not even a little bit. And the regional hegemony, that they want the total control, because look, it's not just only a part of something that they want, it's something that they always want, and they show, and it has become a huge part of their political campaign. This has become a huge part of even their economy. And China is, we can see that China actually is very powerful, because whenever you see their political power, the power they hold all over the country or in their region, that's also very powerful. So just if any kind of foreign judges, if even they like feel like, no, I should not resign, I can stay here and I can change and everything, this is not something that's going to happen, because China is so powerful. The significant amount of change that one person wants, it's not going to happen in this way. So even foreign judges, they stay there. They choose to stay there. That I might stay there and do something because I might be a part of this. This is something in reality that's very hard to do, and it's near impossible, because they won't have the control, and they just won't have the control or power over China. They're just going to be the showpieces that they are going to show. Look, we have this kind of foreign judges as well beside our domestic judges, and we are having a fair balance. And this kind of things, it's something that's going to like show people that like fake hopes, but actually this is something that they're just doing just to stop the protests and everything. They might use this as thing. Look, there are foreign judges as well. Yeah, you don't need to protest and all. But look, this kind of things, it's something that's not going to happen. The more the foreign judge will stay, the more the amount of guilt that is going to he's going to feel. The more he stays, the more the China is going to overtake it. The more and more you are going to feel guilty because of it. And you will see those people every day, they are suffering because of this kind of loss. And the more you will see this kind of power taken every day and people suffering every day, this is something that's going to create a lot of mess, and it's something that should not happen. So the actor in his best position, like in this situation, what is going to be the best option from him time, considering all the facts, is to resign, because this resignation is something at least that can and have the attention and destroy the mass, and destroy the China's this kind of plans that look, you might have fairness because of this kind of judges, and it's seriously going to affect everyone. So for if you think from the foreign judges perspective, obviously we should resign. Thank you.
Hello, am I audible? All right. If at any point you can't hear me, just interrupt me in the middle of the speech. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think a lot of their arguments are contingent on proving that this singular foreign judge is going to be able to hold China to account, and is probably going to be able to exercise a significant amount of autonomy in the rule of law in Hong Kong. We're going to prove to you why that is extremely unlikely to happen, not necessarily because China is going to aggressively crack down on like the way of life in Hong Kong, but the ways in which they're going to do it are going to be far more nefarious and far more ways in which you can undermine the power of this singular judge on the CFA to begin with. If we can reliably prove that the incentives and the actionable incentives of China in and of themselves is to make sure that your direct ability as a judge is undermined, we don't think that the case stands in and of themselves, which means that all of their harms and benefits of you being able or not being able to advocate doesn't stand. So firstly, why do we think that China will enforce their national security laws, and why there's probably going to be less change under their side of the house? So again, in terms of pure statistics, let's try to paint a picture of what that national security law actually looks like right now. It looks like China has ability to set legal precedents for a wide range of things that they consider to be dissent and protest against their one party or like one country system, right? The fact that they want a unified mainland China with Hong Kong, the fact that they can like willingly and politically justify as a huge part of their political push, not only in their like in their own country, but also in their regional hegemony. The fact that they can say that the Hong Kong protest that has happened in 2020 is a fundamental attack against their sovereignty. Now, this national security law gives them legal precedence to like crack down on all of these protesters by saying that these are individuals who are going to secede from my country, or these are individuals who are sowing dissent, or these are individuals who are sowing a lot of discord in society, right? So we think that because of this ability for China to enforce legal precedents, we think that change is like extremely unlikely under their side of the house. Why do we think that China then has an incentive to ensure that these legal precedents are things that they implement on a large scale? So 4 reasons. Number one, they want to quell the Hong Kong protests that have been happening in their backyard because they think that it is a source of instability and a threat to their sovereignty. Number two, they have a history of being brutal to like lots of protesters. Think about what happened to Uyghur Muslims, or think about what happened to like any kinds of protests that happen in China, right? There are people who value homogeneity a lot. But thirdly, Xi Jinping probably doesn't want Western influence in his backyard, right? We've seen that happening in the case that he's been like repeatedly trying to undermine Hong Kong's power as a Western hub of economy and like, you know, cultural, like, you know, whatever. But more importantly, we think that like Xi Jinping wants to like implement a strongman image of himself, right? So the point in time where they want to advocate like under their side of the house, we think that like that will result in a further greater escalation under their side of the house, because Xi Jinping wants to maintain his strongman image of being able to respond to criticism and not back down from negotiations, which means all of this proves that under their side of the house, the ability to make China negotiate favorably is significantly less. Then why is this incentive actually actionable under their side of the house? 2 reasons. Number one, we think that under this national security law, Beijing already has power over how the law is interpreted from the CFA, which means that this is a direct undermining of the authority that this foreign judge is likely going to have, which means that, for example, if you want to uphold democratic values when protecting an opposition leader or someone who's protesting against China, your ability to do that is going to be significantly curtailed, because Beijing can still call you and say, bro, you're not interpreting the law properly. But more importantly, they already have Beijing advisors right there to like constantly monitor and surveil you to figure out whether or not you are being beneficial to China in and of themselves. But lastly and more importantly, what does all of this result in? It results in their absolute best case, the absolute feeling of powerlessness as a judge, which means that even if you feel like you've worked your ass off your entire life to be in this position to determine the rule of law and how people are going to live in Hong Kong, the fact that you cannot really do that in the first place means that the immense amounts of powerlessness that you feel is going to be significantly worse than the guilt you feel when you leave, because it feels like you, despite all of your abilities, despite all of your talents, despite all the money and the faith that people have over you, aren't being able to do much in the current status quo, which means that even in their best case, even if you're probably like even if you have solidarity with other people who are probably going through similar things as you are, we think that you're still alone in that solidarity, because the people who are constantly being like, you know, put into prison for just, you know, exercising their freedom of speech, the fact that you're able to see them every single day makes you feel significantly worse, because it essentially sends the message that these are individuals on the ground who feel like you are not on their side. But lastly, let's take them at their absolute best case and say that, okay, you're probably able to fight. How is China likely to react? China is probably going to react in like gradual forms of escalation. And this is extremely harmful because we told you that they're already trying to get all of these foreign judges replaced, but the point in time where they can essentially frame these judges as people who are undermining the rule of law and the national security law that China has implemented means that it is now easier for China to paint them as inessential to CFA, which means long term, this probably doesn't happen like in like 5 or 6 years, but long term, considering these terms exist for a long time, it means that your autonomy is likely going to decrease over time. But more importantly, during that time, you're probably going to oversee a lot of cases where China is going to implement their non-democratic values, which means the mental trauma of going through all of those courses, all of those cases is going to eventually build up. And at the end of it, you don't even have autonomy to begin with. So even in their best case, they lose. So what's the like exclusive extension you're going to get from third affirmative? We're going to provide you a comparative as to how the guilt you feel under their side of the house is significant because of the proximity effect compared to the guilt you feel when you leave under our side of the house. So let's be clear on incentive structures, right? We agree that foreign judges are like people who are part of the judiciary, right? They're literally 1/3 of the government, which means they have a huge responsibility, power given to them by the people, and faith that others have put into them, which means that they obviously care a lot about democratic values, and they've been brought up for the sole focus of upholding those democratic values, which means given that we're able to prove that national security laws and the ways in which they're interpreted, not only structurally through like Beijing surveillance, the fact that all of these things are extremely undemocratic, the fact that you're giving individuals max prison for exercising their freedom of speech, the fact that you're cracking down on opposition parties in mass, the fact that you're like, cracking down on people just for, clapping hands in court, or, making some kinds of drawing which are not really beneficial to China, means that it's very clear to the judge right now that this is not a democratic institution, which means the point in time, the more and more they try to associate with this system, a system that they probably cannot change internally to a large extent, and like the negative also hasn't been able to prove how mechanistically they're able to change this system. It means that the more and more you stay here, the more and more you associate yourself with an entity that is undemocratic. That is what our first affirmative essentially meant when they said that the more and more you stay here, the more and more you internally feel that you're supporting China and you're supporting undemocratic values. Why is this guilt significant and comparatively worse? Because we think that the guilt from associating yourself with such an institution not only is a core attack on what you yourself believe in, the fact that you want to uphold and advocate for democratic values as they agree to, but secondarily, this proximity effect is likely to be significant, right? You directly see the people the victims and the criminals who you are presiding over in any particular case. You directly see the effects of all the opposition parties who are getting cracked down upon because you literally live in that city, right? You directly hear their cries, their pleas to have their freedom of speech respected, which means that proximity effect of going to court and seeing that every single day is far more significant under their side of the house as compared to our side of the house, where if you leave, you probably look at the atrocities in Hong Kong from a much much more third person view, which means on a comparative, that proximate guilt under their side of the house is significantly worse. For all these reasons, very proud to affirm.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, that last speech wasn't recording. I just accidentally double clicked. Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I'd like to welcome up the third speaker of the affirming team to continue their case.
Am I audible? All right, just give me a few seconds to organize my notes and start the timer, and we'll turn on the video. Am I visible, by the way? All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. One very important clarification in this debate. This debate do not happen in a context where like China just want to imply national security law and you haven't tried to like sway China out of it, right? This debate happens in a context where you tried your best to sway China not to imply national security law, but you failed to do that. You understood how powerful China is and how vulnerable you are compared to China, that you cannot make China to imply this sort of horrible law, the horrible law that doesn't only limit the power of the individual, but also limits the power of you, because the ruling that you have in the national security law, which was never responded by the previous speaker, is something that where China holds a lot of significant power, where if someone speaks against China, yes, we never said you as a foreign actor will be affected, but the people will be affected, and China will be able to do legislatively, forcibly do a lot of things which will be allowed because of the national security law. The law in and itself decrease the power of the judges to a very significant level. Secondarily, they never respond to our characterization, right? First of all, China never wants their foreign power in their backyard, which they never respond to. Secondarily, and more importantly, we have given you structural mechanism to prove why China has a vested interest to influence their power within Hong Kong, right? Historically, we have seen there are bad blood within China and Hong Kong, and why did that happen? Why did people who lives in Hong Kong in a very good lifestyle still fight against China? Because they know China tries to control their democracy and try to impose power that creates bad blood within China and Hong Kong, right? And these are the people in the CFA have been criticizing China and trying to depower China in this context. But China, as an actor, which they agree, by the way, wants a supreme power within the Asian continent, want to be more powerful, right? That is to say, the likelihood of them in the future trying to impose more and more law, try to forcibly impose laws like national security laws and more laws are going to be significantly much more, where these people will not be able to sway China. Now, why is that so? Because their only mechanism of response is this: oh, China will let those legislative people to have some sort of power, right? Why? Because China will be criticized. First things first, China has a track record of violating a lot of human rights. China has a track record of attacking Taiwan, right? Doing a lot of harmless thing. Did China care? The answer is no. And in the negotiation, China has a track record of being very strong and very like in our first characterization, right? Like the Xi Jinping has this sort of characterization of trying to hold the image of a strong man, right? So you will gonna create media pressure, and for that media pressure, they will feel threatened, and that is why they will allow those foreign people to exercise a lot of power. Is a very unlikely characterization. Rather, our characterization that China is likely to depower those people more and more, so that China can get more and more influence on Hong Kong and other region. Our characterization is proven to be more likely in this in this scenario. Now, at the very best case, maybe they will let these judges stay in China, but the power that they will have will be very tokenistic, where they will have very limited control to do any significant significant effect to allow democracy to be there, and that's even bad, because China can now say, oh, we have these foreign people in Hong Kong, and they can say, oh, we are not harming democracy, right? So this is something that they can scapegoat by when these sort of people stays in the country, right? That is to say, like we have proven to you how vulnerable these judges will be in the future. Now, why these judges can see this coming in the future? Because obviously they are highly educated and highly competent, right? And national being. That is to say, it's very obvious for them the amount of power they have seen that China is having, and the amount of influence they are having. So it is obvious for them to see these sort of things coming, right? Secondarily, their response is this: oh, if I leave China, then I will know I didn't try my best. First things first, I already know that I cannot do that, right? I have given you structural reasoning why they can see that China will eventually become more and more powerful, and why they are likely to lose their power at the end of the day. They can see that with their own eyes, right? Now, why is this important? happen. This is important because when they will see China getting more and more powerful and they cannot actually do anything about it, and they can see national security law implying to people, if people are getting harmed by this national security law, and more law that will come in the future, and that is likely to come in the future, and for all of this new laws proposed by Chinese government, people will get more and more harm, which I myself will see with my own eyes, and I can talk, but the likelihood of me being able to influence China will be significantly less if I don't resign and if I allow China to do whatever China is wanting to do. Right now, why is this important? Because they themselves say China is emotionally invested. Right? If China is emotionally the people, the judges are emotionally invested. If the judges are emotionally invested and they see people suffering and they cannot do anything about it, they are just a tokenistic puppet, this thing will emotionally affect them because of the proximity. They just cannot say, oh, proximity mechanism do not work. The mechanism of proximity, which they comply to some extent, proves that if you can see this sort of things happening and you are in the position of power who is unable to protect those individuals, you will feel extremely guilty and emotionally fucked up if you see these sort of things happening within your own eyes. Now, if you go back to your country, yes, you might feel guilt, but at the end of the day, the proximity effect that you are in the position of power and you are seeing with your own eyes these people are suffering is less. That is to say, the intensity of guilt is significantly much more in their side of the house. Some unnecessary contribution from the first negative speaker. First of all, they assume that they can never get jobs. So first of all, they are highly qualified and has a significant amount of experiences. That is to say, if they go back to their country or whatever their country it is, they have like a handsome resume to provide and get another job immediately. And secondarily, they are competent people. That is to say, they are most likely to be very much confident and they are pretty much self-assured that they will be able to find job. And third of all, people are not as dumb as they think, right? That is to say, people won't be like, oh, you resigned, that means you are a coward, right? People know that people who hires people in powerful position are smart people. They will know and they will understand these people do not just resign because they are chickens, for instance. They resign simply because they have seen and they have fought for democracy. They have high morals, because the principal contention was about their fight for democracy, right? And we have shown you how if they really believes in this value and if they see that for national security law and the further law that is likely to come will hamper democracy and they will have no voice, on a principal level they should resign as a form of protest as well. So people will understand and people will obviously give them job. Now, why we win this debate? Because we won this debate by proving why things will get worse and why things are already worse off. That is to say, that determines their debate, and we have proven why their basic assumption do not work. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. And to close debate, I'd like to welcome back up the leader of the affirming team.
Hello, am I audible? Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Facts don't care about your margin pushing. We are extremely clear in telling you that for a vast majority of cases throughout the last decade, China has had enormous amounts of international scrutiny put towards them, right? The fact that they oppress the Uyghurs, the fact that they are violating a lot of regulations in the World Trade Organization, right? Did they care then? No. We've given you empirical and statistical evidence to suggest that even when the entire international community were in public outcry over their treatment of Uyghurs, their own sovereignty was still the thing that they cared about the most. And that's the fundamental underpinning as to why our characterization of China is much more believable, right? China as a whole cares about their sovereignty a lot, and they care about their regional hegemony more than their global hegemony. Which means that the kinds of ways in which we characterize China to be able to implement that power is disingenuous to the responses that came from negative side. We didn't say that China is going to crack down harshly. We said that China is going to implement nefarious ways in which they can directly undermine the power of the CFA to the long run. I'm not sure why the response to that is, oh, the debate is in the now, but like, come on, the term that you have in CFA is probably going to be for multiple decades, right? Which means you're probably still going to feel the effects in the long run, but the comparative then under their side of the house is that you're battered and bruised, mentally speaking, because you constantly feel like your power is slowly and surely being undermined and chipped away, and your ability to advocate for the democratic values that you care about in negative side is significantly curtailed. We've given you statistical and empirical evidence as to why this incentive is actually actionable, right? We've given you evidence as to how Beijing already has power over law interpretation directly in the CFA, and how they're probably Beijing advisors who are constantly surveilling the CFAs and trying to ensure that their version of law is what is being passed. No responses, because they probably agree that this is true, or they probably read articles on this, I don't know. But the thing is, all of these things are empirical evidence that suggests that this is an incentive that China has that is actually actionable. So insofar as all of their argumentation is contingent on proving that this CFA judge is able to bring China to account, or is able to silently work within the system and bring changes in that way, we've received no mechanistic reason as to why that is likely to happen. But we've still debated on their best case, right? We've said, okay, even if you're able to fight, how is China likely to react? We think in the vast majority of cases, we've proven to you that China is likely to react in escalation, which means they're already trying to get these individuals replaced. So the point in time where they can point to the narrative that their sovereignty is directly being harmed by Western influences, that is the point in time where they can galvanize a significant amount of mainland Chinese population to go against the CFA. And panel, we've already proved to you that even though Hong Kong is a hotbed of Western countries, there's still a vast majority of Chinese influence in Hong Kong as well, right? It is still literally China's backyard. But lastly, and more importantly, what was the biggest win condition, as they say, under our side of the house that they probably didn't engage to? So firstly, the idea as to how the more and more you associate with a system like this, you feel like you're associating with a system that's fundamentally undemocratic. We've given you heaps of reasons as to why this is significantly harmful. Because not only is this antithetical to who you are and who your values are as a person, but also that act of resignation is not a singular act. We've given you reasons as to how that act of resignation is probably going to have a domino effect in telling individuals that you do not want to associate with a fundamentally undemocratic system. So I don't really understand their argumentation as to how people are going to think that you're a fake judge or you crack under pressure when you're taking a stand against something which is fundamentally undemocratic. But we've proven to you why that proximity effect is so important under their side of the house, right? So yeah, even if you spend a lot of time in Hong Kong and then you leave and you still feel that pain, we compared that, right? We said, okay, probably you do feel that pain under our side of the house as well, but the pain you feel under their side of the house is far more significant because you're still actively trying to make sure that the lives of these people are better, but you're still failing. So the compounding effect of that powerlessness and seeing the faces of these individuals that you failed is far worse under their side. Very proud to affirm.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for a great debate. I'll give the result first and then go into the reasons for decision. But first, some general feedback. I think one thing that both teams could have really focused on in this debate is a comparative in terms of the big picture of what this debate looks like. I think both teams were able to discuss the individual incentives of the judge in terms of how they feel on both sides of the debate. But I think there's obviously more at play in this debate with regards to like how the court as a whole might operate, how China might replace the judge in both sides of the world. I think there's a lot of material in terms of just characterization and framing in this debate that could have been a lot tidier if teams took a minute to explain the reasons why judges or the reasons why other actors in this debate might respond to the thing that the actor does that might have helped both teams extend impacts more. In terms of the result, the panel was unanimous. We thought that this was won by the negating team by a relatively clear margin. So congratulations to the negating team and commiserations to the affirming team. In terms of why we saw the debate the way we did, we think the debate broadly came down to two main areas. Firstly, what the nature was of the types of cases that this foreign judge was ruling on and what the impact of their rulings would be. And then secondly, where this judge felt more emotional responsibility or more emotional guilt based on the decision they made. On the first clash of the nature of the types of cases they were ruling on and the impact of those rulings, I think the first thing to resolve was like what was within China's power within this debate. So the affirming team gave a lot of reasons why China has an incentive to continually pass laws that will halt protesters in Hong Kong, being that they want to maintain control of Hong Kong and maintain that image that it is part of one China. The negating team, in contrast, gives reasons why China will not cause harm to any judges and will allow the CFA specifically to make their rulings, but can choose to ignore those rulings in favor of passing the laws they want, in those specific areas. I think both of these conceptions are true and actually mesh a lot better than the teams might have anticipated. That is to say that I think the affirming team is able to demonstrate that China will want to stop protests, but aren't able to demonstrate why the mechanism for achieving this would be causing any actual harm to these judges or trying to pressure them beyond ignoring the rulings they make, but still allowing them to pass down those rulings. So I think a little bit of mechanization was missing from the affirming side there. Comparatively, I think the negating team was able to show that China has incentives to allow these judges to still make these rulings because they implemented that court themselves and they care about that international view. I don't think they do enough to defend why these rulings won't be ignored, but I don't necessarily think that that changes much in terms of the debate. The impact of this just means that it is true that China has a lot of power to pass laws, but that power does not necessarily extend to changing the types of judgment that the CFA hands down. It just changes how they might react in response to those judgments. So then, like, what are the types of cases that these judges rule on? The affirming team tells us that these judges will have to constantly rule on protesters, meaning that they will be the ones that are passing down punishment directly to people who they empathize with and might see as victims. Next says a few things in response. I think there are three main responses. First, that though this punishment is true, you might have capacity to do things like make that punishment less threatening, maybe decrease sentencing. Secondly, they tell us that there is a wide variety of cases these judges can rule on that go beyond just like geopolitical or protest issues, things like ordinary commercial decisions that impact individuals. And finally, that China is happy to leave some human rights concessions in order to maintain global image in the face of Hong Kong being a slightly unique jurisdiction that doesn't just abide by Chinese law. I think that first response is slightly new, that it comes out at third neg, so is discounted a little bit in how I engage that with the types of areas of law that the affirming team tries to present to us. But I do think that the negating team quite conclusively is able to claim that a variety of cases that this judge rules on is a benefit that they run right from first and is unresponded to. I think as a result, the negating team is able to build this as a benefit insofar as the judge cares about justice, because that judge can now dole it out in a variety of legal matters, even if it's not specifically on the national security law. I think the negating team had scope here to impact this more by running analysis on the types of people that might decide these cases in absence of this foreign judge. But as it stands, I do believe that you are able to do some good, and the affirming team does not contest this. I think further, there's insufficient attempt to engage with whether there is nuance between China's desire to crack down on major protests and whether that extends to any of the shades of human rights freedoms that the CFA has been able to hand down. And I think as a result, that means that the negating team is able to demonstrate that there is some unique benefit to these judges acting on these courts, and they can change people's individual circumstances in some cases. Finally, then, in terms of the impact of these rulings, the affirming team says that the judges on the CFA court have limited impact because China is effectively able to do whatever they want. And if anything, they contest that the CFA's role will just diminish over time as China attempts to claim more and more power in Hong Kong. The negating team says that you can get strategic backlash. So if you stay and make judicious decisions, people become incredibly critical when China does things like overriding those decisions. I think the negating team could have developed this material slightly more in the absolute to demonstrate how the judge sees this backlash as valuable. What the affirming team says here is that China already faces significant backlash internationally when they oversee human rights abuses, but nothing ever changes with regards to their behavior. I think the problem here, though, is that the burden that the negating team sets themselves isn't necessarily to actually change China's behavior. So I think the response from the affirming team misfires to some extent as it focuses purely on whether you're able to push the needle on what China does. I think even though the negating team doesn't necessarily impact this argument to the extent where they claim some tangible benefit in terms of China's behavior changing, they are able to demonstrate that choosing to stay and highlight where your decisions are being overruled, firstly, has more of a marginal impact than leaving, as other judges have already done, especially if China just continues that negative behavior. Secondly, I think the negating team is able to show there is like enough of a potential for a snowball effect that you reduce the amount of scrutiny over time if you choose to leave. But I think finally they show that the judge feels they have some sort of moral duty to still be offering criticism in a way that is judicially meaningful. So I think that means that at the end of this first large pointed clash, the negating team is able to demonstrate that even though ultimately China is still able to pass the laws that it wants, the judges on the CFA are able to negotiate these minor concessions that at the very least alleviate some burdens on people on the ground, but that they can further use their rulings as a way to highlight when China is acting in anti-democratic ways. Then finally, just in terms of like where the judge feels emotionally more guilty or like they've not like gone back on their responsibilities and things like that, the first thing to resolve here is how the judge's conception of their own duty as a judge is impacted. I think the negating team does quite a good job at leading this material here. They tell us that when you sign up to be a judge in Hong Kong specifically, you're upholding the rule of law, which is especially important because you're likely coming from a jurisdiction like the UK, like Australia, like New Zealand, where you might care a lot about kind of like democratic values of law and passing those down. The way that they impact this material is to say that giving into China's like not quite an actual demand, but just soft pressure, sends a really negative signal that you will bow down in the face of pressure. So things like job prospects and your reputation as a judge inherently diminish because you back down. The affirming team in response claims that most people are willing to understand that China is like a bad actor in this debate, so your job prospects and reputation won't be harmed to a huge effect. I think the affirming team is correct in saying that job prospects, for example, might not necessarily be harmed in that it is possible to get another job if you are a really high-flying lawyer. The problem is that I think the negating team is still able to demonstrate that the way that you see yourself as discharging your duty greatly diminishes in a world where you feel like you failed in that duty to uphold the uphold values of justice in face of China trying to absolve themselves of responsibility to do the right thing. The comparative argument we get instead from the affirming team is that by engaging with an anti-democratic system, when you hold those values, that is something that is antithetical to what you wanted to defend. I think the important thing that the negating team is able to run to kind of deal with this duty and obligation material is to say that often these judges, when they sign up to become a judge in Hong Kong, are aware that China as a whole is an anti-democratic system, but what they value is their capacity to make individual changes that are more democratic or more just. And I think that links into that analysis that the negating team brings earlier with regards to the impact that these rulings can have on individual lives. So even if the system as a whole is still anti-democratic, these judges are able to affect good changes for individuals within the system. And that is still a meaningful benefit in a way that these judges see their responsibility playing out. So I'm willing to believe the negating team, that is something that is important to these judges that will be lost. And I think this is where the affirming team could have used some comparative analysis slightly more to explain how they potentially see these judges using or absolving themselves of that responsibility in a world where they do leave the system and are unable to hand down these decisions. But I think given that we are not given an alternative pathway for these judges to do things like uphold rule of law in Hong Kong, the negating team is able to demonstrate by quite a large margin here that their conception of duty requires them to stay in Hong Kong. Finally, then, just in terms of where the judge feels more moral responsibility, and I think this is some of where the affirming team focuses the vast majority of their case, and that is on the proximity effect and the intensity of guilt that you feel as a judge on the affirming side when you stay in Hong Kong and are passing down these rulings that are immediately ignored or that immediately uphold the rule of law in order to harm people on the ground. I think the negating team is quite strong in response to this material, however, which is to say that you feel personal guilt when you leave, especially knowing that you were able to effect change for individuals on the ground by staying. I think this material would have been stronger from the affirming team if it came with some discussion of comparative analysis that explained why it was that staying wouldn't necessarily give you any capacity to make those individual changes. But as it stood, I think the negating team was able to quite concretely demonstrate that if you lived in Hong Kong for as long as you did, mere proximity in terms of distance would not be enough to absolve that moral guilt, and that staying and actually making changes to people on the ground was the best thing that that judge could do in order to feel like they made the right decision. And that's why, on a relatively clear margin, the negating team takes this debate. So congrats again.